The Hunter's Mistake. The Serix Empire stretched across 17 star systems, a testament to their prowess as the galaxy's ultimate predators. They did not build this empire through diplomacy or cultural exchange. They built it through fear and the perfect application of violence. Commander Varric stood on the bridge of the Fang of Night, his flagship, admiring the blue-green planet that rotated lazily on the main view screen. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of anticipation among his kind. His scales rippled with dark iridescence under the ship's lights, and his neural crest extended slightly in excitement. "Another world for the Empire," he said, his voice a low rumble that reverberated through the bridge. "What do we know of these humans?" Science Officer Tarek approached, her slender form gliding across the deck. Unlike Varric, whose body was built for combat, with dense musculature and reinforced bone structure, Tarek was built for speed and precision. "They are bipedal mammals, Commander, technologically primitive by our standards. They've barely reached beyond their home system with a small colony on this world, which they call Nova Terra. Our scans indicate approximately 12,000 colonists." Varric's upper lip curled into what passed for a smile among the Serix. Perfect. Just enough to send a message, not enough to pose any real threat. The Serix conquered through a precise methodology refined over centuries. First, they would identify a species' primary fear. Every species had one. The one thing that could break their will to resist. Then, they would exploit it mercilessly until submission was the only logical choice. "What is their weakness?" Varric asked. Tarek hesitated, a brief ripple running through her neural crest. "That's unclear, Commander. They seem unusually protective of their young. They expend considerable resources on individuals who cannot contribute to their society." Compassion. Varric spat the word like a curse. "A fatal evolutionary flaw. We'll target their children first. When they see we're willing to harm what they value most, they'll surrender without a fight. It has worked on 17 worlds. It will work on the 18th. "There is one other thing, Commander," Tarek added. "Their historical records show unusual persistence in conflict. They've fought wars against themselves that lasted decades, even centuries." Varric dismissed this with a wave of his clawed hand. "Fighting their own kind is different from facing the Serix. Prepare the landing party. Standard protocol. Select 10 children at random. Bring them to the central settlement for a public demonstration." "Yes, Commander." The Serix ships descended through the atmosphere of Nova Terra, their sleek black forms casting long shadows over the human colony below. The settlement was orderly, with prefabricated structures arranged in concentric circles around a central administrative hub. Solar collectors gleamed in the morning light, and agricultural fields stretched to the east. The humans noticed the ships immediately. Alerts sounded. Some ran for shelter, while others stood watching the sky. Security forces mobilized, but their weapons were laughably inadequate. Civilian-grade pulse rifles and a handful of light artillery pieces meant for defense against the planet's native fauna. Varric led the landing party himself. He always did for first contact. There was something satisfying about seeing the fear in alien eyes when they first beheld the Serix in their full glory. The landing craft touched down in the central plaza. Varric emerged first, standing at his full 3-meter height, his exoskeletal armor glinting in the sunlight. Behind him came 20 elite warriors, each carrying neural disruptors and shock tethers. A human delegation approached cautiously. At their head walked a female with silver-streaked hair and a determined expression. She wore a simple uniform with insignia that Varric's translator identified as denoting leadership. "I am Governor Elena Chen of Nova Terra Colony," she said, her voice steady. "We welcome peaceful contact with other intelligent species." Varric didn't bother with his translator. Instead, he activated a neural disruptor and fired it at one of the security officers flanking the governor. The man collapsed, his body convulsing as his nervous system was overloaded with pain signals. The other humans raised their weapons, but Governor Chen held up her hand. "Stand down," she ordered, though her face had paled considerably. Now Varric activated his translator. "I am Commander Varric of the Syrinx Empire. Your colony is now under our control. Resistance will result in pain. Compliance will result in survival." Chen's eyes flicked to the officer still writhing on the ground. "What do you want from us?" "Complete submission. Your resources, your labor, your obedience." Varric gestured to his warriors. "Collect 10 of their young for the demonstration." The Syrinx warriors moved into the crowd, using their scanners to identify the locations of human children. The colonists reacted with confusion at first, then with horror as they realized what was happening. What followed surprised even Varric. The humans didn't cower or beg. They attacked. Not just the security forces, but everyone. Construction workers wielding tools as weapons, farmers with agricultural implements, parents with nothing but their bare hands. They fought with a ferocity that seemed impossible for their fragile forms. "Restrain them," Varric ordered, astonished by the resistance. His warriors deployed shock tethers, ensnaring dozens of humans in crackling energy fields that should have incapacitated them instantly. Many fell, but others pushed through the pain, their determination overriding their biological response to agony. A human male broke through the line of warriors and hurled himself at Varric, a crude blade in his hand. Varric caught him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "Impressive," Varric said, studying the human's contorted face. "But futile." He squeezed, expecting to feel the satisfying crunch of breaking vertebrae. Instead, the human jammed his blade between the plates of Varric's armor, finding a gap that shouldn't have been visible to such primitive eyes. Pain lanced through Varric's side, and he dropped the human in surprise. "Fall back," Varric ordered, pressing a hand to his wound. Green blood seeped between his fingers. "Secure the perimeter." The warriors retreated to defensive positions, erecting energy barriers between themselves and the humans. They had managed to capture only 2 children and a handful of adults before the resistance became too intense. Back aboard the Fang of Night, Varric paced the detention level, his wound treated but his pride still smarting. The humans were isolated in separate cells, subjected to sensory manipulation designed to break their will. One of the captives was a scientist, according to the identification found on her person. "You are Dr. Maya Patel," Varric said, entering her cell. "A specialist in xenobiology." The woman sat cross-legged on the floor, her dark eyes tracking Varric's movements. She showed signs of the interrogation. Bruises on her face, burns on her arms, but her gaze remained steady. "And you're making a serious mistake," she replied. Varric laughed, a hissing sound that echoed off the cell walls. 17 species have said similar words. All of them now serve the Empire. "Then you've never encountered humans before." Dr. Patel's voice was hoarse but determined. "We don't respond well to threats." "Everyone responds to fear, Doctor. It's just a matter of finding the right stimulus." Varric moved closer, looming over her. "Your children, for instance, so vulnerable, so precious to you." Dr. Patel's expression changed, not to fear as Varric expected, but to something harder. "You've studied our biology, but not our history. Do you know what happens when humans are threatened? They submit, like all intelligent life." "No," she said quietly. "We unite, we adapt, and we remember." Varric dismissed her words as bravado, the empty threats of a defeated species. He turned to leave, but her next words stopped him at the door. "You should release us now," she said, "while you still can." Later that day, Varric received an urgent communication from the Orbital Watch. More ships had been detected entering the system, human ships, more advanced than their colony vessels. They moved with purpose, their trajectories suggesting military precision. "Impossible," Varric muttered. "Their nearest military base is light years away." But the evidence was irrefutable. Somehow, the humans had called for help, and that help had arrived far sooner than should have been possible. The tactical display showed 12 vessels, each smaller than the Syrinx cruisers but moving faster, their energy signatures suggesting weapons systems that hadn't been detected during the initial survey. They were hiding their capabilities, Tarek said, her voice tight with concern. The colony was a lure. No species sacrifices its young as bait, Varric countered, but doubt had crept into his mind. The first attack came without warning. 3 Syrinx scout ships disappeared in simultaneous explosions, victims of weapons that had penetrated their shields without triggering defensive systems. For the first time in his long career of conquest, Commander Varric felt the cold touch of uncertainty. The hunter had made a mistake, and now the prey was showing its teeth. The hunted becomes the hunter. Admiral Helena Reyes of the Earth Defense Fleet watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The surprise attack had gone exactly as planned. 3 enemy scout ships neutralized before they could react. Now came the hard part. All vessels, execute pattern Delta, she commanded. Let's show these Syrinx what humanity does to threats. The 12 Earth ships split into 4 attack groups, each targeting a different aspect of the Syrinx formation. They didn't attempt to match the alien superior firepower. Instead, they exploited the gaps in the Syrinx defensive screen, using speed and coordination where they couldn't compete on raw power. Aboard the Fang of Night, Commander Varric watched in disbelief as the human vessels danced around his cruisers, their smaller size allowing maneuvers that his capital ships couldn't match. Target their propulsion systems, he ordered. They can't evade if they can't move. The Syrinx gunners fired salvos of plasma torpedoes, but the human ships released clouds of reflective particles that scattered the targeting systems, causing most of the torpedoes to detonate harmlessly in empty space. They're using our sensors against us, Tarek observed. These tactics, they're not in any of our combat databases. Varric slammed a fist against his command console. Because no one has ever fought like this. It's illogical. They sacrifice defensive positioning for offensive opportunity. On the view screen, a human vessel took a direct hit from a Syrinx cruiser. Instead of retreating, the damaged ship accelerated directly toward its attacker, launching a swarm of small objects before its reactor went critical. The resulting explosion created a momentary gap in the cruiser's shields, just long enough for the objects, now revealed as boarding pods, to attach themselves to the hull. They're boarding the Twilight Claw, a communications officer reported, disbelief evident in his voice. Within minutes, reports flooded in from the boarded vessel. Human soldiers in powered armor were fighting their way through the ship, heading for vital systems. They moved in small, coordinated teams, using tactics that seemed to evolve in real time as they encountered Syrinx resistance. They're adapting to our internal defenses, Tarek said, reviewing the security feeds. They're learning as they fight. For the first time in his life, Varric felt a sensation that took him a moment to identify. Fear, not the calculated assessment of risk that had guided his countless battles, but genuine, primal fear. These humans didn't fight like a species should. They fought like they had nothing to lose, even when victory seemed impossible. Commander, the communications officer interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Varric straightened his posture. He would not show weakness before this enemy. Put it through. The main view screen switched to show a human female with dark skin and short silver hair. Her uniform bore the markings of high rank, and her expression was one of controlled fury. This is Admiral Helena Reyes of the Earth Defense Fleet. You have attacked a human colony and taken human hostages. You have one opportunity to surrender. Varric barked a laugh, though it lacked his usual confidence. Surrender? The Syrinx do not surrender. We have conquered 17 star systems. Your primitive fleet cannot hope to. The 17 systems you subjugated were isolated species, Reyes interrupted. Humanity isn't alone. While you were focusing on Nova Terra, 5 of our ally races have mobilized their fleets. They'll arrive within 12 hours. Her expression hardened. You attacked our children. There is no greater crime in human eyes or in the eyes of our allies. Varric felt his neural crest flatten against his skull, an involuntary sign of distress that he couldn't control. "You're bluffing," he said. "Our intelligence would have detected such alliances." "Your intelligence failed to detect that Novaterra was a heavily disguised military research outpost," Rice countered. "It failed to detect our advanced weapon systems, and it failed to detect that humans have a neural structure that your pain inducers cannot fully affect." As if to punctuate her words, alarms blared across the fang of night. Internal security had been breached. Somehow, humans were aboard his flagship. "The prisoners," Tarak gasped. "They've escaped." Varric roared in frustration. "Secure the bridge. Prepare for internal combat." But it was too late. The doors to the bridge slid open, revealing Dr. Maya Patel, the supposedly broken scientist, holding a Cerix neural disruptor. Behind her stood a group of freed human prisoners, armed with stolen weapons. "I told you that you were making a mistake," Dr. Patel said calmly. "Humans don't break under pressure. We get creative." Varric drew himself up to his full height, towering over the humans. "You cannot hope to control this vessel. The security systems will recognize your interference and initiate purge protocols." "Already taken care of," Dr. Patel replied. "While you were focused on the fleet battle, I was accessing your computer systems. Did you know that Cerix neural interfaces leave traceable patterns in your network? Fascinating technology, really. I've been studying it since you brought me aboard." For the first time in his long career, Commander Varric found himself without a strategic response. These humans had outmaneuvered him at every turn, anticipating his tactics and countering them with approaches no sane species would attempt. "What do you want?" he finally asked. Admiral Rice, still on the view screen, answered. "An unconditional withdrawal from human space, the release of all colonists, and a formal recognition of human territory as sovereign and protected." "And if I refuse?" Dr. Patel stepped forward. "Then we'll do what humans have always done when faced with predators. We'll hunt you to extinction." There was no bluster in her voice, no emotional display, just a simple statement of fact that chilled Varric more than any threat could have. He looked around his bridge, at his officers watching him for direction, at the human prisoners who had somehow turned the tables, at the tactical display showing his fleet surrounded and outmaneuvered. The Cerix had always used fear as a weapon, but they had never experienced it themselves, until now. "Very well," Varric said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I will order a withdrawal." 4 days later, Varric stood before the Cerix High Command, his posture rigid as he delivered his report. The chamber was silent as he recounted the encounter with humanity, the unexpected resistance, and the negotiated withdrawal. "You retreated," High Commander Zax said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You, who have conquered 17 worlds, retreated from primitives." "They are not primitives," Varric replied firmly. "They are unlike any species we have encountered. They do not fear as others do. They use fear as fuel. When threatened, they become more dangerous, not less." "So you counsel what? That we avoid human space? That the mighty Cerix Empire skulk around these mammals?" another commander asked incredulously. Varric's neural crest rose slightly, a gesture of determination. "I counsel that we study them, learn from them, perhaps even trade with them." Gasps echoed through the chamber at such a radical suggestion. "They defeated our best commander with inferior technology and fewer numbers," Varric continued. "Imagine what we might achieve if we understood how they think, how they fight, how they transform fear into strength." High Commander Zax was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying Varric intently. Finally, he spoke. "You will lead this study. You will learn all there is to know about humans. And then, when we understand them completely, we will decide whether they are to be allies or conquered." Varric bowed deeply. "As you command." As he left the chamber, Varric recalled the words Dr. Patel had spoken to him during their final encounter before the human prisoners were returned to Novaterra. "The difference between your species and mine," she had said, "is that you evolved as solitary apex predators. You never needed to cooperate to survive. Humans evolved as social prey animals. We had to work together, to innovate, to outsmart creatures stronger and faster than ourselves. That's why we'll always find a way to defeat you if you force us to fight. It's written in our DNA." For the first time in his life, Commander Varric of the Cerix Empire found himself hoping that his species would not have to test that theory again. Some predators, he had learned, were wise enough to recognize when they had met their match. In the vastness of space, a new balance of power had emerged, one based not on fear, but on mutual respect between hunters who had finally encountered worthy prey.